Hello and welcome to the fourth historical topic of AP African American Studies. Today we're looking at ancestral Africa, ancient societies, and African American studies. We're actually going back further in history than the third historical topic, which covered the Bantu and Nok expansions. Today we're going as far back as 6000 BCE with the development of the Egyptian civilization, and 3000 BCE when Egypt was unified. We'll start with the first learning objective. Describe the features of and goods produced by complex societies that emerged in ancient East and West Africa. The first civilization that we're looking at is Egypt. It emerged along the Nile River around 3150 BCE, about 5,170 years ago. What made this a complex society was its deep and complex religious system, a writing system called hieroglyphics, and a governing system in which dynastic rulers or pharaohs held control. Egypt was originally known to the Egyptians as Kemet, which stood for Black Land, named after the Nile River soil of the floodplain. Every year, the Nile River would reliably flood and bring silt up to the farmland, which the Egyptians used to grow crops and maintain their civilization. There were 30 dynasties in Egyptian history. The first pharaoh was Menes or Narmer, who unified Upper and Lower Egypt in 3150 BCE, starting the Old Kingdom. This was a period in which Egypt had great power in the region and built the pyramids. The middle period was a time of decentralized power of city-states. There were still pharaohs, but the city-states paid tribute to them while maintaining most control at the local level. The New Kingdom was a period of expansion started by Ahmose I around 1570 to 1544 BCE. The pharaohs were believed to be intermediaries between the gods and the people, responsible for keeping the favor of the gods, which is why Egyptians built temples to please them and their deities. Egypt's contributions to mathematics, medicine, and engineering were also notable, influencing future civilizations. South of Egypt was Nubia or Kush. Nubia, located at the southern end of the Nile, was the source of Egypt's gold and luxury trade items. It was an agricultural region with copper deposits and access to ivory, ebony, and panther skins that were traded from southern parts of Africa. Throughout its 3,000-year history with Egypt as a neighbor, Egypt often attacked or plundered Nubian goods and conscripted or enslaved Nubians to work as mercenaries in the military or servants in nobles' houses. Around 750 BCE, Nubia defeated Egypt and established the 25th dynasty of Black Pharaohs. By 670 BCE, only about 100 years later, they were driven out by the Assyrians. At that point, the Nubians retreated back to Kush and became a vassal state of Axum. Nubia also developed its own distinct writing system known as Meroitic script. This brings us to Axum. The Axum Empire, located near present-day Eritrea and Ethiopia, emerged around 100 BCE. The Roman Empire had conquered Egypt in 30 CE, making Axum the intermediary between Mediterranean and Indian Ocean trade. They controlled the Red Sea through the port of Adulis. The massive wealth they generated helped them develop their own currency and a written language called Ge'ez. They also purchased a strong navy to patrol trade across the entire Indian Ocean. Axum is also known for its impressive obelisks and the famous stelae, which are tall stone monuments. Now we'll move on to the Nok societies, which emerged around 500 BCE near present-day Nigeria. They lived in many settlements rather than cities. They developed two main technologies, ironworking, being the earliest ironworking society in West Africa, and pottery, known for their naturalistic terracotta sculptures. These sculptures often depicted animals or people adorned with various hairstyles and jewelry. The pottery provides clues about the divisions of labor, suggesting that men worked in ironworking while women worked in pottery. The Nok society's advanced metallurgical skills indicates a high level of technological development and social organization. The artifacts from the Nok society are the most ancient surviving evidence of a complex settled society in sub-Saharan Africa. The second learning objective is to explain why Africa's ancient societies are culturally and historically significant to Black communities. Starting with the significance of Axum, it was the main trading empire in East Africa and the first African society to adopt Christianity under King Ezana between 320 and 360 CE. This adoption was significant because it was done on their own terms, not forced upon them due to their relationship with the Roman Empire. They promoted the change in their coins used across the Indian Ocean, marking them with crosses. Axum's adoption of Christianity influenced the religious landscape of Ethiopia, making it one of the oldest Christian nations. The Axum Empire also developed its own written language called Ge'ez, which is still used as the main liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. It also has ties to the modern languages of Tigrinya and Tigray, spoken in Ethiopia and Eritrea. Because of Africa's rich history, it has been used to counter racist stereotypes of Black Americans in the most recent past, from the 17th to the 20th century. From the late 18th century, African American writers emphasized the significance of ancient Africa. For example, in the 19th century, abolitionist John Rusworm wrote about the Egyptians as Africans, countering the belief that Egyptians were Caucasian and highlighting that Black Americans shared in the major contributions of the Egyptians. Examples from ancient Africa were used to counter racist stereotypes that characterized African societies as without government or cultures. In the 19th century, scientists tried to claim that Egyptians were Caucasian based on skull sizes, a pseudoscience that later evolved into phrenology and became one of the bases for eugenics in the early 20th century. Some texts that form the early canon of African American studies claim Africa as a homeland. Phyllis Wheatley, the first Black female poet to have a book of poetry published, is sometimes seen as the mother of all Black literature. One of her earliest poems, On Being Brought from Africa to America, describes Africa as a pagan land but claims it as a homeland nonetheless, because Wheatley herself was captured in Africa and enslaved as a young child. Claude McKay, a Harlem Renaissance poet, also describes his origins as African in his poem Outcast. The developments and contributions of ancient societies in Africa were used as motivations for Black Americans in the 20th century to not settle for disparate treatment from the white counterparts. Research demonstrated the complexity and contributions of African societies in the mid-20th century, which supported African revolutionaries and independence movements. Researchers classified as Africanists challenged the notion that Africa was ahistorical. In the 1940s, W.E.B. Du Bois published The World in Africa, arguing that Africa had a rich culture before the slave trade. Archaeological research in the 1940s uncovered Knox society's history, culminating in a stronger cause for Africa's political claims for independence from European colonial powers. And in the 20th century, aided by Europeans weakening during World War II, African countries began to shed their colonial powers. This started with Libya in 1951, Morocco and Tunisia in 1956, Ghana in 1957, Nigeria in 1960, Kenya in 1963, and Zimbabwe in 1965. The decolonization movement significantly reshaped the political landscape of Africa, leading to the establishment of new nations and governments. Alright, finally here's the recap. Egypt was the earliest complex society based on agriculture with its own script, division of labor, governing system, and religion. The decline of Egypt gave way to Nubia and Axum, societies based on trade through the Red Sea. Nok was the oldest complex society in sub-Saharan Africa, evidenced by ironworking and terracotta pottery. Finally, ancient history dispels racist stereotypes about the continent as a place without government or culture, and it strengthened the calls to end colonialism in the 20th century. The legacies of these ancient societies continue to influence modern African cultures and the global African diaspora. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the next lecture, click the thumbnail on the screen, and if you would like more resources to help you study, you can visit apushlights.com/afam. I wish you the best of luck with your studies, and I hope to see you back on the next lecture.